Laughter bubbled from the patio, where champagne flutes clinked in the warm Atlanta dusk. The cold backyard glowed with string lights and soft jazz, the scent of grilled lamb and roasted peppers drifting through the air. It was a celebration of achievement. Brandon Cole, 17, valedictorian, full scholarship to Duke University. He stood at the center of it all, surrounded by classmates in pastel polos and sundresses, teachers from his magnet school, and beaming neighbors. His smile was effortless, his charisma magnetic. To them, Brandon was the dream in motion. Black excellence polished a shine dot inside the house. The kitchen was quieter, lit only by the golden wash of the setting sun. Tasha Cole, his mother, carefully placed grilled chicken over a bed of jollof rice on a tray. Her hands, strong and worn, moved with practiced grace. She wore no makeup, just a faded t-shirt and old jeans, the uniform of someone who worked hard, often and always. The tray was heavy, but she carried it with ease. She stepped into the backyard, blending momentarily into the hum of conversation. Heads turned slightly, not toward her, but toward the steaming food she carried. She didn't mind, she never did. This was Brandon's night. A woman in heels and pearls, the mother of one of Brandon's classmates, gestured toward her with a manicured finger, then leaned in, asking with a smile to wide, "Oh, Brandon, is that your mum?" Brandon glanced toward Tasha, who was just setting the tray down. For a moment, his face flickered. Just a second of hesitation, almost imperceptible. Then, smoothing his voice into something casual and light, he said with a small chuckle, "Oh no, that's our house help. She just helps around the kitchen." A beat of silence followed. Not long, but enough. The classmate's mother nodded politely, murmured something non-committal, and turned back toward the bar. Tasha stood frozen, one hand still resting on the tray. She hadn't expected recognition. She never did. But this. Her eyes met Brandon's for a brief moment. He looked away. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply turned, quietly, and walked back into the house. No scene, no outburst. Just the soft shuffle of her footsteps against the tile floor as she disappeared inside. But something inside her, something old and tender and long sacrificed, cracked. Not with sound or fury, but with the kind of quiet that leaves echoes. Tasha Cole had learned early that life rarely bent to desire. At 22, she'd fallen for Malik James, a jazz guitarist with a crooked smile and a pocketful of dreams. He played smoky clubs and made promises wrapped in melody, whispering futures. He never meant to build. By the time Tasha realized she was pregnant, Malik was already gone, drifting from city to city, leaving her behind with little more than a worn photograph and the bitter echo of his guitar strings. From that moment on, her life narrowed to a single purpose. Brandon, she raised him alone, stringing together long hours and low-paying jobs to keep them afloat. She scrubbed toilets in suburban mansions during the day and served wings and watered-down cocktails at a local bar by night. Sometimes she pulled double shifts as a hospital janitor, mopping sterile corridors until dawn. Rent always came first, then food, then everything else. She rationed her joy, saving it for the rare days when Brandon brought home glowing report cards, or when his smile cracked through the exhaustion. She didn't have time for shame, only work and love. Brandon grew up in the soft shadow of her sacrifice, watching her rise before the sun and fall asleep fully clothed on the couch. As a child, he was tender with her, always reaching for her hand, resting his head on her shoulder. But the world had a way of whispering cruel things. Other kids noticed her uniform, the beat-up car she drove, the way she rarely came to school events. They asked where his dad was, why his mum looked so tired. Somewhere along the way, Brandon stopped asking her to come to parent nights. He began walking a few paces ahead of her in public. He began to see her through other people's eyes, and what he saw embarrassed him by high school. The distance had become a quiet canyon. Brandon earned a full scholarship to one of Atlanta's most elite private schools, a place built like a small liberal arts college, all manicured lawns and colonial architecture. There he discovered a new world, one of confidence, wealth, and unspoken codes. His friends talked about their ski trips, their private language tutors, their summers in Europe. Alicia's father was a renowned surgeon who spoke at conferences in Geneva. Devon's family owned 5 properties, each with a view. Brandon learned quickly how to mold himself into their image. Precise speech, tailored clothes from discount racks, practiced disinterest in money. He buried parts of himself, the sound of his mum humming old soul records, the smell of bleach on her hands, the fact that he sometimes skipped lunch to save bus fare when senior year came and college acceptance. Letters rolled in. Brandon decided it was time to show the world who he had become. He begged Tasha to let him throw a graduation party. She resisted. Money was already tight, and the landlord had been calling about late rent. But Brandon pleaded, said it would only happen once. So Tasha, who had never learned to say no to him, quietly dipped into the envelope marked rent. July, and began buying supplies, food, decorations, a rented speaker system. She cooked for days, her hands raw from chopping and marinating. She wanted it to be perfect, not for her, but for him. As the party unfolded, Tasha stayed mostly in the background. She watched from the kitchen window as Brandon laughed with his friends, his voice lilting with an unfamiliar, almost British inflection. He wore the smile of someone trying to hold his place in a world not made for him. He never introduced her. When she approached with food, he called her ma'am, as if she was some distant employee. She told herself it was fine. This was his moment. He'd earned it. But pride is complicated. She was proud of the young man he had become, articulate, ambitious, charismatic, and yet beneath that pride lay a sorrow that threatened to drown her. Her son had fought so hard to rise that he now pretended not to know the hands that had lifted him. She didn't need his gratitude. She didn't need a speech. But to be mistaken for the help, and to hear him go along with it, felt like a quiet erasure, a rewriting of the story she had bled to write. As the music swelled outside, and Brandon laughed louder than ever, Tasha stood alone in the kitchen, her back to the sink, her heart aching in a silence only mothers know. The house was quiet now. The music had stopped, the guests long gone, the scent of grilled meat and spilled champagne lingering faintly in the warm night air. Brandon stood in front of his bedroom mirror, still wearing the crisp button-down he'd picked out for the party, his smile hanging on from hours earlier, drunk not on alcohol but attention. For once, he had felt like he belonged, like all his hard work, all the code-switching, all the pretending had paid off. He had thrown the perfect party. They had looked at him like he was one of them. Then came the knock, soft, hesitant, before the door creaked open. His mother stood there, her face unreadable. She had changed into pajamas, but the exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. "Why did you lie to that woman about who I am?" she asked, her voice low. Brandon turned away from the mirror, startled. What? At the party, she continued, stepping into the room when she asked if I was your mother. You said I was the house help. He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. Ma, come on. You were wearing house clothes. You looked like it wasn't that deep. It was deep to me, she said simply. Brandon sighed, frustration bubbling up. Why are you making this a thing? It was a joke. People were there, Ma. I didn't want to explain everything. Tasha's voice didn't rise. If anything, it dropped. Explain what? That your mother works for a living. That I clean other people's homes so you can sit in classrooms they'll never walk into. Brandon's face twisted. You don't get it, he snapped. You're embarrassing, okay? You clean rich people's houses, Ma. I don't want people to know that. The words were out before he could stop them, jagged and loud, sharper than he meant them to be. The silence that followed was immediate and suffocating. Tasha stared at him, her face softening, not in anger, in disbelief. I scrubbed toilets. For 10 years to get you into that school, she said quietly. I skipped meals so you wouldn't miss your field trips. I worked night shifts while you slept, Brandon. I gave up everything. And now I'm a maid to you. Brandon's mouth opened, but nothing came. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stormed, past her without another word, slamming the door behind him as he left the house, the echo of it vibrating through the walls like a final word. Tasha stood there for a moment, frozen. Then, slowly, she walked back to her room. The kitchen light still glowed faintly from earlier, untouched food on the table. She didn't eat. She wasn't hungry. Instead, she went to the back of her closet and pulled out an old storage box, the kind she hadn't touched in years. Dust clung to its corners. Inside were fading photographs, newspaper clippings, and school awards from Brandon's early years, kindergarten spelling bees, honor roll certificates, a toothless picture from 2nd grade where he clung to her leg like she was his entire world. Beneath them all were other things, less familiar, more private. A program from a debate tournament Tasha once won in high school, a college acceptance letter from Spelman she never got to use, a poem she'd published at 19, a photo of her and Malik before the lies, before the silence, pieces of a life paused and rerouted the moment she became a mother. She sat with the box in her lap for a long time, fingers brushing over her younger self, not weeping, not angry, just remembering. All the parts of her she had packed away to make space for his dreams. And now, in this silence, she wondered who she might have been if she hadn't spent so many years proving she was. Enough for him, for the world, for herself. Outside, the night thickened, and the house fell into a hush. Tasha stared at the photos, the secrets, the woman she used to be, and something inside her stirred Dot in the days after the party. The distance between Brandon and Tasha hardened into something colder, more permanent. He stopped speaking to her entirely, slipping out early and returning late, if at all. Meals she left for him remained untouched on the kitchen counter. His bedroom door, once ajar in quiet invitation, stayed firmly shut. At school, Brandon laughed louder, stood taller. He leaned deeper into the version of himself he had created, the polished upper-class teen who fits seamlessly among Atlanta's elite. To Alicia and Devon, he casually explained that his mother was out of the picture. Sometimes he said she had moved overseas. Other times he shrugged it off like a painful memory too old to revisit. He no longer just concealed his background, he rewrote it. When it came time to submit his final application materials to Duke, Brandon took it further. He used a friend's Buckhead address as his own, replacing the cramped apartment he'd grown up in with a mansion he'd never stepped foot in. For parental information, he listed a fabricated godmother, a well-educated aunt with a business degree and a husband in finance. On his essay, he wrote about the privilege of mentorship, how he was raised in a household that valued philanthropy and tradition, how his family instilled in him a vision of global citizenship. He signed it proudly with a name he had never used before, Brandon Cole James, as if slicing his mother's name off the end would help him outrun its weight. While Brandon rehearsed his new identity, Tasha quietly began rebuilding hers. Days blurred together until one afternoon, while walking to the bus stop, she ran into Kemi, an old friend from church who now ran a small catering and event planning business. Kemi took one look at Tasha and said, "Girl, you look tired. Come, work with me. I could use someone smart, someone who knows how to manage a kitchen better than half my staff." It wasn't cleaning. It wasn't scraping by. It was something with dignity, purpose. Tasha hesitated, then nodded. She hadn't realized how hungry she was to feel useful in a way that didn't erase her. Still, something lingered. Each night, after her new shifts with Kemi, Tasha sat alone with an envelope labeled in her neat handwriting, asterisk to Brandon. When you forget, asterisk inside were photos of him from his baby years, old drawings he made in crayon, me and Mummy, scrawled beneath stick figures, and letters she'd written over the years, but never mailed, from when he got into the magnet program, when he lost his first tooth, when he turned 13 and suddenly stopped hugging her. She began adding more to the envelope, newspaper clippings about single motherhood, notes from teachers who praised his drive, even receipts from trips she couldn't afford but made happen anyway. Then, slowly, she began making calls. She tracked down old neighbors, his second-grade teacher, even the pediatric nurse who once helped her get medicine for him during a rough winter. She started printing photos of herself holding down 3 jobs, of the small apartment he grew up in, of his awards on the fridge. Tasha wasn't sure what she was building, not yet, but she knew it had to mean something. It had to speak, where she no longer could. Then came the final blow. One afternoon, while helping Kemi with some paperwork, Tasha saw a familiar name on a Duke scholarship application. Kemi had offered to review for another student, Brandon's, out of curiosity. Tasha read the first few lines. Her stomach dropped. She read it again, the address, the parent section, the essay, all of it fabricated. She wasn't mentioned once. The person described on those pages was a stranger, a polished fiction built on the deliberate erasure of everything she had given. Her hands trembled as she put the paper down. It wasn't just that Brandon had hidden her. He had made her disappear that night. When he finally came home, she was waiting. He looked tired, annoyed, his bag still slung over one shoulder. She stood in the doorway of his room, her face streaked with silent tears. "You used a fake address," she said quietly. "You said someone else raised you." Brandon didn't answer. "You even changed your name," she continued, her voice beginning to shake. "You made me vanish. You erased me." Brandon exhaled sharply, irritated. "I did what I had to do. To get into Duke, to get ahead, to be taken seriously, to finally stop being that kid." His tone was icy now. "You don't get it, Ma. That life, that apartment, your uniforms and your busted car, that's not who I am anymore." Tasha stepped closer, her voice cracking. How can you be ashamed of the woman who raised you?" And then he said it, not with malice, but with terrifying clarity. "Because you're not part of the man I want to be." For a long moment, the room went silent. Tasha stared at him, her lips parted, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't anger that filled her then. It was grief, a kind of loss that didn't come with funerals or flowers. The quiet death of a bond that had once been unbreakable. She turned and walked out of the room. This time, she didn't slam the door. She simply closed it behind her. The envelope sat on her nightstand, untouched, not ready to be given. Not yet. The ballroom glittered with soft chandeliers and polished silverware, the air thick with cologne, ambition, and the quiet hum of future power. Brandon stood tall in a navy-tailored suit, his tie a perfect Windsor knot, his smile smooth and practiced. The Duke University Young Leaders of Tomorrow's scholarship dinner was everything he had envisioned, an elite gathering of donors, alumni, and the hand-picked few deemed exceptional enough to join their ranks. He worked the room like a natural, exchanging handshakes and compliments, each introduction another brick in the new identity he had so carefully built. He was Brandon Coljames here, articulate, confident, untethered from the struggles that had once defined him. Dinner had just been cleared when the event host, a stately woman in pearls and an air of practiced warmth, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice crisp over the microphone. "Before we close out the evening, we have a special presentation. Tonight, we celebrate not only achievement, but resilience, the stories behind the students who have made it here against the odds." She smiled meaningfully. "Please welcome our surprise guest speaker, Ms. Tasha Cole." For a split second, Brandon didn't register the name. It was too surreal, too impossible. But then gasps rippled through the room and heads turned. And there she was, his mother, walking slowly, steadily to the stage in a modest but elegant dress he hadn't seen before. Her hair was pulled back, her shoulders set. She didn't stumble or shrink. She owned the room. Brandon's breath caught. His heart slammed against his chest. He sat frozen as a spotlight bathed her in gold. Tasha took the microphone, her voice calm, smooth like polished stone. "Good evening," she began. "My name is Tasha Cole. I was invited tonight, not as a donor, not as an alum, but as a mother." A hush fell over the room, thick with anticipation. "I raised my son alone. His father left before he could form memories of him. I worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and clothed. I cleaned houses, hospitals, hotels, whatever paid. I gave up dreams I once had, not out of regret, but out of love, so he could have a future. I never did." Brandon sank lower in his chair, his stomach twisting into knots. He could feel eyes shifting toward him, subtle and searching. He wanted to disappear. Tasha continued, steady and poised. "My son is brilliant. He's earned every grade, every award. But success can be complicated. Sometimes, when we rise, we forget the hands that lifted us. Sometimes, the world teaches us that love is something to hide when it doesn't come in polished packaging. That struggle is shameful. That sacrifice is something to distance ourselves from." A pin could have dropped in the silence. "Not long ago," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "my son introduced me to someone at a party, not as his mother, but as the house help. Because I wasn't dressed the part. Because I didn't belong to the image he wanted to project." Brandon's face flushed hot, blood pounding in his ears. A couple of alumni looked away, uncomfortable. Alicia, seated a few tables over, glanced at him with a mix of surprise and slow understanding. Tasha never said his name. She didn't need to. But I am not ashamed, Tasha declared, lifting her chin slightly. I am not invisible. I am proud of my son, proud of who he's becoming. But I will never let him or anyone forget who carried him here. My name is Tasha Cole. I am a mother. I am a worker. And I am the reason he stands among you. The room erupted into applause. A standing ovation rose around her, some polite, some deeply moved, all thunderous. Stepped back from the microphone, bowed her head once, and walked off the stage with grace, her shoulders high. Brandon didn't move. Couldn't. The applause rang in his ears like a verdict. Everything he had tried to bury had just stood center stage, not with bitterness, not with vengeance, but with truth. And that truth, spoken out loud in front of all the people he'd tried to impress, stripped away every layer of fiction he'd wrapped himself in. As the room settled, a few people offered him small, awkward glances, some empathetic, others wary. But Brandon didn't look up. He couldn't. The weight of his mother's words, the haunting grace with which she'd delivered them, settled into his chest like a stone. He wasn't sure if he felt anger, shame, or gratitude. Maybe all three. But one thing was certain. The image he had tried so hard to perfect had just cracked, and the truth at last had stepped into the light. After the dinner, Brandon couldn't meet a single gaze. The laughter, the applause, the shimmer of the chandelier, all of it faded behind the echo of his mother's voice. Her words clung to him like a second skin, louder than the applause, heavier than the silence that followed. He slipped out, before dessert, ducking into the night like a man exposed. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts from classmates, a missed call from Alicia, and then one message that stopped him cold. Asterisk, why didn't you ever tell us she was your mum? She's amazing. Brandon stared at the screen until the light dimmed, the weight of the truth finally catching up with him. Over the next few days, the careful world he had built collapsed piece by piece. His friends grew distant, their laughter forced, their trust fractured. Alicia no longer saved him a seat at lunch. Devon kept his replies short. Whispers followed him down hallways. Then came the email from Duke, a formal request for a meeting with the admissions board to discuss discrepancies in his application. His stomach turned. He already knew what they'd found in the meeting room. Under bright fluorescent lights and the steady gazes of administrators, Brandon broke. The suit he wore felt like a costume now. He confessed everything, the fake address, the false family history, the godmother who never existed. His voice cracked as he spoke of shame, of ambition, of the deep, aching desire to belong. Tears welled in his eyes, not for the scholarship slipping away, but for the years he had spent denying the very woman who made any of this possible. When he finished, the room was silent. The chair of the board thanked him for his honesty. They informed him his scholarship was suspended pending further review. He nodded, numb. It was more grace than he expected. That evening, Brandon stood in front of the apartment he had once slipped in and out of like a ghost. He didn't push the door open like he used to. He stood there, unsure, before finally raising his hand and knocking. A pause. Then the door creaked open. Tasha stood in the doorway, still in her work clothes, her expression unreadable. Brandon's voice broke as he fell to his knees. "I'm sorry, Mom. I forgot," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "I let shame tell me who you were. I let the world tell me you weren't enough, and I believed it. I let them erase you, and I helped them do it. I'm sorry. Tash didn't speak right away. She looked at him, this boy she had raised, this man now on his knees, unraveling. Her eyes softened, not with triumph or satisfaction, but with something older and deeper, grief, love, and a quiet knowing. She didn't say much, just stepped aside, opened the door a little wider, and let him in. Silently. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. Months later, the rhythm of Brandon's life had changed. He worked part-time at Kemi's shop, unloading delivery trucks, prepping trays, taking inventory. Gone was the boy who polished his sentences to impress and hid his past in half-truths. In his place stood someone quieter, steadier, still ambitious, but rooted now in something real. He'd begun reapplying to colleges, this time with no embellishments, no fictional godmothers or buckhead addresses. His essays spoke plainly of struggle, of growth, of the mother who had shaped him in silence and sacrifice. He no longer tried to erase her. He built his story around her. Tasha often watched from the apartment window as Brandon hoisted boxes into the catering van, laughing with the staff, wiping sweat from his brow without complaint. There was a softness to him now, a humility she hadn't seen in years. And though the pain hadn't vanished, it had loosened its grip, replaced by something closer to healing. Some mornings they sat together with coffee, saying little. It was enough. Inside Brandon's room, above his modest desk, hung a single framed photograph. In it, Tasha stood in a wrinkled nursing school uniform, her eyes tired but proud, holding toddler Brandon on her hip, his tiny arms wrapped around her neck. It was taken the day she'd planned to walk at her graduation, before life forced her to put that dream aside. Below the photo, affixed to the frame with a small yellow sticky note, was a handwritten message. Asterisk, my first teacher, my real resume. Asterisk it. Wasn't grand, it wasn't meant for public applause, but it was the truest thing Brandon had ever written.